Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Montalto, and I'm currently serving as chair of the steering committee of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, and I have the privilege of moderating today's program. Migration is one of the most challenging and complex policy issues facing our nation and maybe in the world as a whole. Too often we look at it from a single lens or with any kind of in-depth analysis. We're trying to change that as a coalition. Our goal is to bring the best evidence forward to illuminate the topic, whatever the topic is under consideration, and always to do this with the needs of the economy in mind and trying to reach a bipartisan consensus on the most important migration issues facing our nation. The coalition is delighted to have entered into a partnership with the New Jersey Business and Industry Association to form what we're calling the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute. The Institute seeks to focus attention on some of the most pressing migration issues, but to do it in a way that's open to diverse perspectives and that utilizes the best research available on any topic. Today's program is the second one for the Institute this year, and as with the first one, the proceedings will be uploaded to the coalition and website as well as to the website of NJBIA. I'd like to thank everyone who is contributing their talent and expertise to today's event. Our distinguished roster of presenters and panelists, the members of the Coalition Steering Committee, and the staff of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, without whose help this program never would have come about. And I'd also like to express our gratitude to the sponsor of today's event, the New Jersey chapter of LICA, or the Land Improvement Contractors Association. Again, without their support, this program would not have been possible. In fiscal year 2021, there were close to 1 million temporary or seasonal workers admitted to the United States. They fell into three broad categories: H-2A, or agricultural workers, 587,000, H-2B, non-agricultural seasonal workers, 123,000, and J-1s, educational exchange workers, 151,000. These numbers have been growing in recent years, yet even with this growth, employers around the country are having a hard time filling all available positions. It is for this reason that the coalition decided to take a deep dive into this issue today. To begin our exploration, we are fortunate to have one of the country's leading experts on temporary workers as our keynote speaker. As Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Washington-based Cato Institute, David Beer has written a series of very well-researched reports on temporary worker programs. Over the years, his writings and articles on immigration policy have been cited or published in numerous news outlets, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. David has over a decade of experience in the immigration policy field, including a 2-year stint as senior policy advisor to the chair of the House Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on immigration and border security, during which time he helped to craft bipartisan immigration policy legislation. David, it's a privilege to have you as our keynote speaker. Thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address this issue in my home state, where I was born and raised, and still have strong ties and am in the state quite often. This is a huge topic, so I'm going to go as quickly as I can through this important issue. Why are temporary workers important in New Jersey? And really listing 4 reasons here. They fill important labor market niches, which increase demand for U.S. workers in other jobs. They lower prices and improve service for consumers. They increase the size of the New Jersey economy and expand its tax base. and they make New Jersey a more welcoming place for businesses to grow. Demand for workers in New Jersey is growing strongly. That you're looking at the average monthly job openings in New Jersey were basically double the average over the last 2 decades in 2021 and 2022. The share of the jobs being filled in the average month has continued its now decade-long decline. Now about 2/3 of the jobs in a month go unfilled, rather than a hire being completed by the employer. And the reason for this is there's just too few unemployed people to fill open jobs in New Jersey. This is the unemployed persons in New Jersey per New Jersey job openings. And as you can see, when it gets below 1, that means there are more job openings in the state than there are unemployed people in the state to fill those jobs. We already talked about the different types, but just to go through the numbers of what's happening with these different programs in New Jersey. H-2A seasonal farm workers. This is the number of H-2A jobs certified by the Department of Labor in New Jersey, basically a 6-fold increase over where we were a decade ago. This is the minimum wage rate, adverse effect wage rate in New Jersey, basically doubled along with the number of workers. These are the major crops that the H-2A workers are working with, again, mainly vegetable and fruits that New Jersey is well known for. The second type of temporary worker is that I'll go through is the H-2B seasonal. This is for non-farm workers. We are pretty steady, but the last year we see a very significant jump in H-2B filings, severe shortage in some of these seasonal non-agricultural jobs. The top 3, landscaping and groundskeeping, specifically one that you don't necessarily always think about is the golf resorts in New Jersey use a lot of these workers. And then recreation attendance and food concession, Six Flags Great Adventure is taking the bulk of these workers, as well as some of the locations down the shore. J1, summer work and travel, cultural exchange workers who come in over the summer. This is what's been happening with this program. We don't have data for 2022 yet, but the last 2 years really hit this program extremely hard. A lot of the shortages that we saw in Ocean City, Atlantic City, elsewhere down the shore were caused by this significant reduction in the number of J1 summer work and travel students coming in to work in those positions. F1 students on optional practical training. This program is for people after they graduate from a U.S. university, can stay. Again, we don't have data for New Jersey up through 2022, but as you can see, prior to the pandemic, we were on a big upswing with this program. More workers were coming in and staying after graduation to work for New Jersey employers. The same story is true for H-1B. Up to 2021, really saw a record number of initial petitions for H-1B workers in New Jersey. Over 18,000 of these petitions were filed. This is just showing what's happening with H-1B worker wages in New Jersey. Right now, if you look at the yellow line, that's H-1B. The median wage for H-1B worker in New Jersey was $112,000. That is now higher than more than 90% of all U.S. workers in the country. So it is an extremely competitive program, very highly paid workers entering this program. These are the top H-1B New Jersey companies: Wipro, Tech Mahindra, Ernst & Young, Mindtree, Goldman Sachs. We're talking about finance and IT dominating this list. Then we have L1 intercompany transfers. This is for multinational companies looking to move mainly managers from overseas locations to New Jersey to manage operations here. This is interesting. We've actually seen somewhat of a decline even before the pandemic. I would attribute this mainly to the policies of the Trump administration, and even the later Obama administration really looked at a very critical eye at L1, at the L1 program, mainly because there are less labor regulations on this particular program. These are again the top program. Top two are in IT, top New Jersey companies. The next one I want to focus on, there are a lot of different types of programs within the J1 visa bucket, but one I want to call out is physicians and postgraduate training. This is a very important program nationwide and for New Jersey. We're getting about 100 to 150 physicians entering New Jersey for their postgraduate training at New Jersey hospitals over the last decade. So this is just a summary of what I've gone through so far. These are the major programs and their numbers, and then a ballpark estimate of how many people are active in the program at any given time, for 2022. And most H2A and H2B and J1 summer work and travel, these people are leaving every year. They're coming in and they're coming for the summer and they're going home. For F1 OPT, we can have anywhere between 1 and 3 years in that program, depending on whether you're a STEM graduate or just any other type of graduate. And then the H-1B skilled worker program, you could have people on that program staying for many years. It's a 3-year visa, renewable once, but you could have people extend beyond that if they're waiting for a green card. And then the L1 and J1 physician programs are kind of similar in that they're multi-year program. And then there are a lot of other visas that beyond the scope, hard to go into all the different categories. We got E's, I's, other J categories, O's for people with extraordinary ability, P's for professional athletes, Q's another cultural exchange program, and R's for religious workers. All of these programs, fill important roles in the New Jersey economy. I just want to call out the last point I'll make, is that the gateway to a green card really comes through these temporary worker programs. As you can see in New Jersey, permanent labor certifications was really the first step of the employer-sponsored green card program. 91% are on behalf of H-1Bs, Ls, TNs, and others fit into that bucket as well. These are people, again, these are the highest skilled workers in the New Jersey economy, 100,000 median annual income for these workers. Then you have students and grads. Again, this would be the OPT workers who'd be getting sponsored after their graduation for a green card. Then you have some other temporary workers at 1%. You look not in the US, just 2% of the people getting sponsored for green cards through the permanent labor certification process, the employer sponsored process, are not in the US. So the vast majority of people who get sponsored for a green card have to get a temporary work visa first. So it really is the gateway to a path to citizenship for these workers. And really the H-1B and the L programs, those are the ones that kind of contemplate that path. They allow employers to simultaneously go through that process. H-2A, H-2B, some of these other categories, J-1, summer work and travel, you're not getting sponsored for a green card very easily through those programs. I'll just stop there. I appreciate any feedback, and I'll wait your questions to the end. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David, for a very informative talk. I think seeing these numbers in the larger context are very helpful, and it provides a very good foundation for our upcoming panel discussion. David will be rejoining us later. If you have any questions for him, please remember to use the question box, and we will try to review as many of your questions and get to them later on in the program. It's now my pleasure to hand the gavel over to Pat McGovern, who will introduce the distinguished members of our panel today. Pat is a partner at Genova Burns, one of the leading law firms in New Jersey, where he specializes in employment and immigration law. We're also very fortunate to have Pat as a member of the steering committee of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, where he shares his legal expertise and experience with other members of our leadership team. Pat, thank you for serving as moderator for today's discussion, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nick. And how's the audio? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Very good, thank you. Good morning. As Nick indicated, this is Pat McGovern, broadcasting from downtown Newark, New Jersey. And it's my pleasure this morning to first introduce our distinguished panel members. First, Anthony Catanoso is a principal owner and managing partner of Steel Pier Associates, which owns and operates the world-famous Steel Pier in Atlantic City. The pier features an observation wheel, rides and games, bar, restaurant, family pub, and food outlets. Anthony has 3 decades of experience in the hospitality industry and serves on the advisory board for the Lloyd D. Levinson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality, and Tourism at Stockton State. The Steel Pier has been honored with the first annual Jim Whalen Tourism Award, the Atlantic Cape Restaurant and Gala Hospitality Award, and the Atlantic City Convention and Visitors Authority Foundation Spirit of Hospitality Award, to name just a few. Our second panelist, Lori Ann Flanagan, is the chair of the National H-2B Workforce Coalition. Lori Ann is Executive Vice President at DC Legislative and Regulatory Services, has over 25 years of experience in the federal legislative and regulatory process. Her expertise includes a variety of issues, including labor and immigration. In addition to lobbying government officials, Lori assists clients with strategic government relations planning. She advises clients on upcoming regulatory and legislative initiatives that could affect their businesses. Our next panelist is Peter Fury. Peter is the Executive Director of New Jersey Farm Bureau, a position he's held since 1982. The Farm Bureau is the largest membership association of farmers in our state, with 7,000 members. The NJFB is headquartered in Trenton and was organized in 1919. As Executive Director, Peter's responsible for, among other things, managing the professional staff that supports the decision-making of its farmer officers and board of directors. This includes the primary tasks of commenting on state and federal legislative proposals, executive agency regulations, judicial precedents, and media relations that affect the agriculture commodity producers in New Jersey. Our fourth panelist today is Lori Jensen. Lori is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association and the New Jersey Forestry Association. She also serves on the board of the New Jersey Green Industry Council. She has over 20 years of nonprofit management experience. During her tenure with the NJNLA, the association began producing a consumer-facing television program called Growing Green, has reinvigorated their Women in Horticulture program, and annually produces over 45 education sessions for the Northeast's largest landscape trade show and conference, Total Pro Expo. Welcome to all participants. Now to get started with our issues. We have about 35 minutes to discuss the following issues. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to be brief so we can hear from each panelist on these issues, and we have several to cover. Let's start with Anthony, if we could. Anthony, would you tell us a little bit about your organization, the Steel Pier? What's the mission, and what types of services does Steel Pier provide that call for temporary workers?
Good morning. Thanks, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. Steel Pier is an amusement pier that's been in existence for 124 years. We are a traditional amusement park. We have 25 rides and attractions, 13 food outlets, 14 games, some retail. Recently added, as you mentioned, the observation boat, which runs 10 months a year. But in our particular case, it's a case of numbers. When we open our park in the spring around Easter, we staff our park with 100% local labor pool, and primarily high school kids. So when we are ready to go full time and 2 shifts, there's not enough labor pool, not enough workers in our area to meet the need. So out of our 400 employees, full-time seasonal employees, about 150 J1 students are needed to complete our full-time summer schedule. So that's the need for us. Of course, we got hurt in 20 and 21 during the pandemic. So that resulted in rides, attractions being closed or hours being cut. So the program is critical to us in so many ways, and we've been using it for our entire existence, basically. And we've been operating on the pier for 31 years now. So it's a critical program for us. It's important to note that it's not part of the immigration. It's a cultural exchange program. It's bifurcated. We work hard to do that. So it's a critical program for us.
Very good. Let me turn it over to Lori Ann. Lori, same question. Tell us a little bit about your organization, the employers that you represent and advocate for, and what types of services your constituency provides that call for temporary workers.
Sure. So I am one of the co-chairs of the H2B Workforce Coalition. I co-chaired on behalf of the landscape industry, jointly working for the National Association of Landscape Professionals and American Hort. I do government relations consulting, so I have other clients beyond that. But the main issues for the H2B program is there's a fiscal year cap on that program. And so the H2B Workforce Coalition represents various employers in seasonal industries. Landscape is the largest user of the H2B program, but you also have hotels, especially in resort areas like the Jersey Shore, forestry, seafood processing, golf, the equine business, thoroughbred horse racing, et cetera. All these diverse, anything non-agricultural uses the H2B program. And the H2B program allows temporary workers to come into the US for up to 10 months a year. But the problem is there's a cap on the program. So as an employer, you have to work with 4 government agencies, the State Workforce Agency, the US Department of Labor, US Department of Homeland Security, and the individual workers are actually interviewed at the State Department. It is an expensive and not easy program, but it would work well if not for this arbitrary cap of 66,000 workers. So we've been able to get some temporary relief, but we really need a long-term solution to the cap. Otherwise, what we have seen, especially with the state of unemployment that David talked about earlier, is there are several employers that have applied for the program, that qualify to bring in these temporary workers, but that are getting capped out because of this arbitrary cap that was put in place in 1990 by Congress, and they are not able to bring in workers under the cap, or if we've gotten some cap relief, it's been too little too late. So you might need workers in landscape in the spring, but under some of this later cap relief that we were able to get the last couple of years, not bring those workers into June or July, and that's been a problem. So I'll stop there and happy to talk more as we go on with our panel.
Very good, thank you. Peter, let me turn it over to you. Same issue, tell us a little bit about Farm Bureau and your constituency, what types of services that they provide, and farming, but if there are any kind of more detailed categories of jobs that call for temp workers, that is crucial.
Sure, thanks, Pat. The Farm Bureau is the farmer representative organization, sometimes called the Farmers Lobby, or even the type of chamber of commerce dedicated to farmers. So we're a business association consisting of small business commodity producers. And in New Jersey, we have approximately 7,000 members. And significantly at the national level, we're at 5.3 million member association. And when it comes to immigration, we rely upon our national association to be right on the front lines there in Congress about changing policy on immigration. We do not at New Jersey Farm Bureau embrace or facilitate enrollment in the H-2A program. That's up to the individual producers to decide whether or not it fits for them. And we have actually mixed feelings about H-2A because we see it as unnecessarily expensive and loaded with legal liabilities, okay? So consequently, the amount of participation as a percentage of total farm employment is rather small. We estimate about 1,800. I know David from Cato put that about 3,100. But we have a seasonal workforce in excess of 15,000 seasonal workers and a total ag employment profile of 25,000 workers. So that limited participation in H-2A tells you about how limited the scope is. However, we're optimists. We'd like to see reform at the federal level, have positions about how to change it, and we're anxious to bring that up to date in this panel program.
Very good, thank you. Lori Jensen, same question. Tell us a little bit about your organization, the mission of your organization, and the types of services your constituency provides that call for temporary workers.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association, we represent hundreds of businesses in New Jersey encompassing the nursery, greenhouse grower, landscape, and garden center industries. So New Jersey's nursery and floriculture crop industry continues to be New Jersey's leading agricultural crop, and it's valued over $500 million. And according to a 2019 census of horticulture, this is an increase actually of $93 million from the previous census, which was in 2014. So think about that. We're actually larger than New Jersey's sale of corn, blueberries, cranberries, and other fruits and vegetables. And we've actually moved up to rank fifth in the nation for nursery stock sales. So nursery production accounts for about 40% of New Jersey's ag output, and the green industry in New Jersey is estimated to contribute about $4 billion to the state's economy. So there was a turfgrass economic impact study done by Rutgers, our land-grant university, back in 2019. The total impact of New Jersey's home lawn maintenance, right, we're going to go into the landscaping end of things now, was estimated to be $2.8 billion. So New Jersey turfgrass service providers, which would be landscapers, people that cut lawns, maybe do fertilizer on lawns, those kinds of things, it's estimated to be $127.3 million in state tax revenue. So that includes sales and use tax, personal income tax, and corporate business tax. So that same economic impact study also asked companies that responded, what are the factors that affect your success? The challenges were grouped into three categories: regulatory, management, and turfgrass related. So under the management category, labor availability was the most commonly cited problem. 83% of respondents actually said that labor availability was their biggest problem. So our members rely heavily on the seasonal labor. Much of that workforce is migratory in nature. It's very labor intensive. It's difficult to get people that want to do it here, that live here now. It just doesn't exist. And, we've tried everything. We do have an apprenticeship program. We're trying to, increase interest in the field. We've gone to job fairs, we have a career board. We've worked with FFA, which is the Future Farmers of America, things like that. We have other issues on the table as well. So, certainly COVID brought supply chain issues. We also have some licensing and regulation issues that are affecting how we can do our business. So this is just an added burden as far as the labor is concerned. So I'll stop there because I could go on forever.
Let me stick with you, Lori, and for the next question, for those members or stakeholders or constituents in your organization that have used the H-2A program or the H-2B program, how successful have they been in using that program for their recruiting?
So the biggest problem, it is like Pete mentioned, there's a lot of paperwork. It's very expensive. You're not going to do it just like, oh, I need some employees. I think I'll, sign up for this program. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of expense involved, but the companies need it. So the ones that go through it, make the effort. They go through all the proper channels. But the problem is sometimes because of the limited numbers like Lorianne talked about, they end up going through all that process and they don't get the workers, certainly don't get the workers on time. And so think of the landscape industry. We're signing contracts right now for next year's work. So we're assuming we're going to have a labor force, but we may not. So that's been a big problem. They don't know whether to sign on for jobs or not. So
Peter,
it's a great program if we could just have that cap problem settled.
Peter, I heard you loud and clear about the negative reaction on the part of your constituency. But do you have any metrics as far as any portion of the agricultural industry in New Jersey that has attempted to use the H-2A and what their success rate has been when they have attempted to use that?
Yeah, as far as metrics, we think there's about a 10% share provided by H-2A workers of the seasonal workforce. And perhaps that could be bumped up to 15% depending on the source of the information. So for those that persevere through the application process, which itself is riddled with delays and multiple approval processes, and the late arrivals is endemic to the program. And then when you bite the bullet as far as the cost of transportation, the adverse effect wage rate, which is well in excess of what we think is the marketplace reality for wages in New Jersey, and then the incidental expenses, if you persevere through all that, the experience is fairly good. Everyone has that can sustain that, reports productive workers, complete their contract, go home, and at that point it functions the way a guest worker program ought. Our challenge is to get Congress to focus on a balanced and fair guest worker program to marry up with the adjustment of status features that they seem to be preoccupied with in Congress. So we know what a guest worker program looks like. There's something called a blue card, which was advanced several years ago and actually passed by the Senate. And approved workers on the international side would get these cards and be admitted through customs and come into the workforce and then return home and facilitate their passage. And this is something that gives us some optimism that we can figure this out if, but for the inflamed politics that is associated with the immigration industry or the immigration policy. It's just a shame that things are so highly charged. We can't settle down and just talk about it in terms of the business aspects of it.
Lorianne, same question for you. Your members, your constituencies, what kind of feedback are you getting from those organizations that have actually used H-2A or H-2B or J and their success rate, and whether it is actually partially responding to their needs for human resources?
Sure. So each of the programs have their own pitfalls. Peter did a good job talking about the H-2A program, the AG program. The J-1 program doesn't have a cap, but it was pretty much shut down during COVID, and it's harder to attract international students with some get visa interviews and stuff. And the H-2B program, the real issue is that it has a cap on the program. The employers that use the program, this is a lifeblood, and many of their employees under the H-2B program will return year after year, giving a really stable, experienced workforce when you can't find US workers. The challenge is you can't rely on that stable workforce year after year because it's up to a lottery system, and when the FedEx truck arrives with your package at the Department of Homeland Security, that often determines when you get your workers and if you get them on time. And so it's really difficult, as Lori talked about, when you have year-long contracts or you might want to implement and buy new equipment look and expand your business, hire new people, to not know if you're going to have the labor force there. And that's really the challenge, is the cap. So what we've been doing as a coalition is encouraging Congress to change the cap. There's really no need for a cap, because you have to do all these things to recruit and prove that you can't find US workers before you're authorized to hire an H-2B worker. But in absence of Congress eliminating a cap, what we are looking at is to either exempt returning workers from the cap. That has been in law in the past, and a couple of years, and it worked well, or find other meaningful permanent cap relief, because it is a good program, and the employers who have used the program have had a very positive experience with the workers, with the stability it provides, with the ability to grow their businesses and hire and promote their US workers, knowing they have those crew workers or line workers that can support them as H-2B workers. The real challenge is the lack of predictability, not knowing if you're going to get workers year after year, and you could have a really successful year one year, and then the next year you have no workforce and your business barely survives. So that's really the struggle.
Very good. Anthony, let me turn back to you. You've heard some of the reforms that Peter and Lori Ann have suggested, blue card, and then kind of streamlining the process to get some of these workers, return workers. Are there any other structural or procedural reforms that you think should be put into place to make the programs more effective, more responsive to your business's needs?
Well, in our business, we only use J1 program. The H-2B, H-2A really doesn't apply. Both programs can work for businesses, but for us, it's a better demographic for us to use the college or exchange student. They fit closer to our workers. And the importance, of the J1, a recent study shows that among employers, 25% said they'd be less likely they would not be able to stay open during the season. 39% said that it's very likely that they would have to reduce their hours of operation, and 22% said it's likely or very likely that they would have to lay off permanent staff. Because it's critical to understand that in our situation, the J1s help strengthen our business and our revenue stream, which actually benefits our year-round employees, because it makes the business overall a stronger financial institution. So the J1 program, there hasn't been any in the last, other than pandemic, there hasn't been any real glitches in the program or the implementation or recruiting employees. An increasing problem is becoming housing. Housing has become more of a challenge. Some organizations will buy housing and supply it. In our case, we relied on local housing, which is kind of evaporated in Atlantic City. So now we're having to provide housing or locate housing for the J1 students, which is a concern. And it comes down to sheer numbers. If I can take another second, if you look at in Kent County, 2 feeder schools for the Maury organization uses 1,500. The 2 local high schools graduate less than 200 kids a year, and there's a need for 1,500 just in the Maury organization. So they could swallow all those plus another 1,300. In our case, Atlantic City High School graduates just a few hundred, and our needs are 400. So the numbers, the need for the numbers are ever present. We need them. We need them every year. We need them stronger every year. As our business grows, the number of employees grow, the high schools or the local talent just isn't there. So, but here again, the J1 program, other than the pandemic years, has been fairly smooth. It stays fairly smooth.
Okay, let me turn it over to Lori Jensen then. And Lori, you've heard what Peter and Anthony and Lori Ann have indicated. Are there any other specific structural or procedural reforms that you would suggest be put in place to make the programs more effective and responsive to employer needs?
So I agree with what Lori Ann said, for sure. Like, we need to have predictability in that. That's number one, is that predictability, so that businesses can plan what their seasonal worker force will look like. So that would be helpful. If there was a way to streamline the process, it's like I said, very labor intensive, very expensive. But we'll stick with the cap. That's the number one, is if we can take care of that cap, we'd be in a lot better shape here.
Okay, let me move on to the next question. Let me start with Lori Ann. A bit of a controversial question. Some critics have claimed that the H-2A and H-2B programs, by tying the legal status, that is their legal visa status, to work for only one employer, so that it's not portable, have given that employer great power over the workers, leading in some cases to abuses, labor law violations. From your observation, is there any validity to that observation? Is it as big an issue as sometimes it's reported? What redress do employees have where this happens?
Sure. So I would say that nobody wants any bad actors in their program, and any bad actor should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If you are abusing your workers, withholding not pay, other things, that is illegal, and any bad actors should be penalized and prosecuted. The concern is it's a few isolated cases where bad actors that are used to give the program a bad name. You also have political agendas where people say, oh, if you only paid these workers more, you treated them better, you'd be able to find US workers. H-2B workers are a cheap source of labor. That's the criticism. The reality is it's the US Department of Labor that sets the wage, and it's well above the state and federal minimum wage. In a lot of H-2B occupations in New Jersey, I mean, you're looking at $18, $20 an hour or more. These workers return often year to year to the same employer because they have a really good experience. And when you talk to the workers, it's really rewarding, because to the employees, the US employees of companies and the employers, they're part of their workforce, they're part of the family. To the H-2B workers, they'll talk to you about how coming to the US and working for a season has allowed them to build a house or send their kid to school, or what it's really meant for their families. And so it's a program that really benefits everyone. It benefits the employer. It gives them a stable source of labor when you can't find US workers to take those jobs. It benefits the US workers because a lot of job vacancies mean as a US worker, you're not getting promoted, you're not growing the business, there's not as much opportunity. Every H-2B worker, studies have shown, support over 4 US jobs. And it benefits the H-2B workers because it allows them to maintain their roots and ties in their home countries, but really provide for their family in a way that they couldn't if they just worked the entire year at home. So criticism about the program is really misguided. The issue about portability is, one, you can, as an H-2B worker, transfer to another employer. Yes, there is a process, but the real problem is the cap. Because if an H-2B worker leaves an employer, or if they return home because they have a sick family member or something and just need to get home to deal with something in their home country, as an employer, you can't hire a replacement H-2B worker under that year. You're approved to hire so many, and if that worker has to leave, there's not a replacement thing. So this would be a really good program if the program really responded to the market demand and the need for the temporary workers. The problem is there's that arbitrary cap that keeps it from doing it. But all of the H-2B workers I've ever spoken to have said what a great experience it's been. And US workers have said how valuable these H-2B workers are to helping them and participating in the business.
Peter, what's been your observation as far as whether employers have taken advantage of their greater power over the H-2B workers? Or H-2A, I should say.
Well, our experience is with the employers is that they're grateful to have the workers there ready to work. And we don't recognize from our experience the premise of the question. And we point out readily that there is recourse with the Department of Labor for oversight of the visa terms. And I think, if I may, there's a little bit of political bias in this claim by people who don't like guest worker programs on principle. So they probably find an example here or there, then try to embellish it to kind of put a smudge on the idea of guest workers overall. But certainly the employers step up to the their responsibilities. And as far as New Jersey is concerned, we know most of the 90 farms in there. We would readily vouch for the way that they've handled these contracts. So I put a little question mark on the question itself.
Okay. Lori Jensen, what's been your observation?
Okay, yeah. So I've visited many of our members, spoke with many of them on the phone, and they are definitely part of the family. In fact, there are some of our employers that actually go visit their workers in their country on breaks and stuff. So they're really part of family. I remember one time I received a phone call from somebody that had, there's checks on the conditions and the housing and all that kind of stuff. And they were so upset because they were given a fine for something pretty minor. And they were like, had I known, I would have done it. Like, they will go out of their way to accommodate these workers and to make things easy for them because they rely on them, and they are definitely family. So are there bad actors? There is in any industry and anything. Are they predominant in this industry? I don't think so.
Okay. Let me turn to the next question. This one is for Anthony. One of the assumptions that we make with temporary worker programs, and I'm specifically thinking about the J program, is that there are procedural regulatory speed bumps, if you will, as far as permitting the J workers who might want to convert to permanent residence in the United States. But do you see that as an issue at all from your point of view at Steel Pier?
We've only had a few in our history that have wanted to convert right away or go for a green card, and the problem has been the expense. Finding the proper legal representation or lawyer that had that set of skills to do it, but then it was an expensive process. We've had a few that are still with us that have stayed, but there was it was a long haul for them to be able to afford to get to that point. So that's primarily been the problem. It's been the expense of the program to get that green card, and the interview process has been somewhat arduous now. And there's a considerable backlog, and a lot of that has, the pandemic has caused a huge backlog in interviews. So there's a backlog in interviews for that process, but I would say primarily the expense.
Okay. Let me turn to the next question, which again is a little controversial. Do temporary worker programs have any effect on the size of the undocumented population in the United States? Would increasing the number of temporary visa holders, would that reduce the number of undocumenteds? Do any of our panelists have an opinion on that? I'd be shocked if no one had an opinion.
Well, since I'm on, I'll jump in and say,
yeah.
The more, it absolutely, I think, would reduce the number. I mean, it would help reduce the number. I mean, the undocumented are going to be here regardless. They're coming in. They're going to continue to come in. But I think it would be a great help. The caps for J1. I mean, I think it needs to be increased. We can all use them. We could use more. Last year we got to about 70% of what we normally use. We need 150. We got to about 90 or a little more. But we need higher caps. We need more of these workers, and it's going to help the business overall. And it does not take away from any local jobs, as I said before. There's,
okay.
We hire all the local we can.
Lorianne?
Excuse me. In general, I think the industry, all the various industries who use temporary worker programs generally support some kind of path to legal status for undocumented workers. It would increase the labor pool. But if you look at some of the actions of the administration on the H-2B program, for example, the administration does realize that the more legal ways to offer to workers to come to the United States, it is something that can help with capacity building, and some of the reasons that folks are coming to the United States, by undocumented or not legal channels. So for example, the H-2B program, there's some additional visas every year, and the administration has set aside some of those visas for workers, specifically from Guatemala, Haiti, El Salvador, and Honduras. as a way to provide some additional stable employment and ways for those workers to come to the United States. But certainly the reality is, regardless of what visa program you're using, for a lot of industries, especially those that have a seasonal component, the real challenge is finding enough laborers. And it's not, you're not taking away any US jobs because the US workers are not applying for these jobs. There's very low unemployment. As Lori mentioned, a lot of times the programs, the work itself is physically demanding or temporary in nature. And if you're a year-round resident of the state of New Jersey, you don't want necessarily temporary work. So in temporary industries where there's seasonal components or temporary surge components, we need all the workers we can get. But employers are committed to maintaining legal workforce. Many employers use the E-Verify program. If you do any kind of government contracting, you're required to use that program to certify the work authorization of your employers. It's the law, but anything that would expand the access to additional workers is helpful from an employer perspective.
Okay, well, we're going to turn to our final segment. We've got exactly 4 minutes left. And I'm going to ask that each of our panelists limit their remarks to each question to 60 seconds. And we're going to start with Lori Jensen. Lori, the National Association of Landscape Professionals has urged support for the Returning Worker Exemption Act, which would exclude returning landscaping workers from being counted in the annual quota. Do you support this reform? And if so, why is it important for the landscaping industry?
Okay, yes, 100% we support. As a matter of fact, I'd like to give a shout out to the National Association of Landscape Professionals and Lorianne and the H2B Workforce Coalition. Without them, they're so supportive of what we need. So shout out to them for doing the good work for us. So yeah, that we definitely support that. I think, by having them be solid as far as, we can count on those people. I think that's a win for everybody. So yes.
Very good. Peter, a major piece of bipartisan legislation expanding and reforming the H-2A agricultural worker program was passed by the House and is now under consideration in the Senate. What's your organization's position on that legislation, and what do you see are the prospects for passage given the congressional election results and what we already understand to be your particular viewpoint about the politics?
That Workforce Modernization Act is a incomplete solution. Our organization does not support the bill as it stands. However, it's not opposition. We're looking to add the ingredients, and as I mentioned before, we strongly believe that the adjustment of status, which is what this bill really does, it came out of California. There's a lot of interest in adjustment of status out there, but it has to be married with the guest worker program. And very little has been done on that score in this bill. And we have some concrete suggestions for that. However, the clock is running out on this Congress, and we're not necessarily optimistic that it can be done in time, but we're dedicated to the idea of new legislation to strike this balance, to establish a constructive program that benefits the workers that are looking for opportunities, as well as the employers that are seeking those workers.
Okay, very good. Anthony, can you explain why the J1 program has been used so extensively by businesses on the Jersey Shore as opposed to H2B? What advantages does J1 offer compared with H2B?
Both programs can work for businesses. For many, it comes down to a matter of choice based on employer culture, dates of need, program familiarity, and overall employer goals. Those of us in the amusement industry hire a large number of teens and college students. J1 participants must be enrolled in university. They are the same demographic as the majority of our American staff. So this makes for an enriching cultural experience for them, and it suits our needs. So it has generally been a J1 program that works best for us.
Okay. Lorianne, I'm going to tee up the final question for you for our panel today. And I think that you may have already addressed this, but here's another shot at it. If the H-2B coalition had its way, would it eliminate any numerical limit on the number of H-2B visas issued each year?
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason for a cap to be on this program. And that's because you have to, as an employer, prove your temporary need, prove you've done everything to find a US worker, pay the rates that are specified by the Department of Labor. All of that, what's called a labor market test, should prove the need. And if you have a bona fide need, you should be able to hire those workers. However, there are political realities. And on both sides of the aisle, in Congress, there is really resistance to just eliminating a cap on a visa program. And so therefore, we have looked at ways to make that cap manageable and more reflect economic realities by supporting things like exempting returning workers from the cap. Those workers have proven that they have not overstayed their visas. They've done their work and gone home. At the end of the work, they've not broken the law or done anything there. They're also returning, which means that they have had a good experience with employers. They've not been abused or returning to bad situations. So in absence of the real ideal solution, which would be a uncapped program, exempting returning workers or finding other meaningful cap relief that really reflects economic realities is essential. And that's what we're working to pursue in Congress.
Very good. Hey, I want to thank all of our panelists this morning. Very enjoyable for me. Now, let me turn the dais back to Nick.
Well, thank you all, Pat and members of the panel. That was a rich exchange of information, all very useful to our coalition in helping to design our position on these various issues. We've now set aside a few minutes for questions from the audience. If there are any questions, you might want to put them in the question box right now. I'll start off with one question that relates to a bill that was introduced in Congress earlier this year. It's called the Seasonal Worker Solidarity Act. And it had support from the AFL-CIO. It would introduce several reforms to the H-2B program, and I'm just wondering what members of the panel might think about those reforms. One would give workers greater control over their visas by giving them 60 days to find a new employer in the event that they wanted to quit their job or they were dismissed. Another provision of this legislation would bar employers who were guilty of labor law violations of participating in the program in the future. So, critics of these types of reform proposals say, when you talk about H-2A and H-2B, you may be talking about the most protected segment of workers in the entire US economy. So I'm going to throw that out. What do you think of this kind of reform effort? Are these two provisions in this proposed bill something that you would support or not? And I would welcome David Beer to join us in this conversation. Anyone care to pick up on that question? Lorianne, I see you there.
Sure. Basically, this is an anti-H-2B bill. Some of the provisions, it sounds great. If you had a labor violation, you shouldn't be able to use the H-2B program. But if a worker forgets to put in earplugs, for example, that's a labor violation. Should you be permanently barred from using the program for minor paperwork violations or things that the employer will need to correct and is responsible for? But and many of those provisions are really intended not to reform the program, but to deny access to the program to employers who legitimately need it. What the counter to that bill is really the H-2B Returning Worker Exception Act, which does include some integrity measures. That also includes, permanent cap relief, a permanent returning worker exemption, but increasing the penalties and fines for those employers that misuse the program, including the ability to be permanently debarred from the program. Nobody's denying that bad actors should be enforced against or denied access to the program, but you really have to be careful about how things are defined. And really, that bill that you cited is just an anti-H-2B bill.
Thank you, Lori Ann. David, do you have any thoughts about that bill?
Sure. I think that, the 60 days isn't long enough. I'd make it 90 days. I think that H-2B workers should, have a lot of flexibility to find another job and subsequent employment. Right now, it's very difficult for them to, complete a job and then go to another job. And, that's a loss to our economy. So that provision is one that stands out. That's good. I agree with Lori that it's overbroad in banning anyone with a labor violation. I mean, this is, everything from less than, you didn't pay a cent, that's a labor violation, even if it's a tiny one. And, it's being lumped in with people who are human traffickers and being, barred from, basically it would shut down many businesses that are entirely reliant on these type of workers. And that's much too great of a penalty for the type of violations that are being considered here. And many of the other provisions in that legislation, again, I agree with Lori that they're intended to restrict use of the program. That it caps the number of workers that can go to a given employer, and does a lot of other things, and it does nothing to facilitate access for employers, increasing the cap and making these workers available when U.S. workers are not. So. There's some good things in there. There's room for compromise. Certainly, the provision providing a path to citizenship for H-2B workers. I support that. I think that, if someone has worked legally in the United States for a given amount of years, they should have the opportunity to apply for permanent residence if that's what they want to do. But the bill has just too many other problems to make it one that would be a net improvement in our immigration system.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to all the members of the panel. We are reaching our time limit here, so we have to move on to our concluding presentation. But I think you have all provided a very useful introduction to this, very important facet of migration policy. So thank you for sharing your suggestions, your insights, and your experience with our audience today. I think it's been a very useful exercise. I knew when we decided to address this topic that we would cover a lot of territory in a short period of time. Indeed, that we might end up with a few loose ends and even some differences of opinion. We were thus looking for someone skilled in navigating diverse points of view to help us reach a consensus on a path forward. I think it would be hard to find anyone more qualified for such an assignment than Teresa Cardinal Brown. Teresa is Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy for the Washington-based think tank called the Bipartisan Policy Center. She brings a wealth of experience to her current position, having previously served as Director of Immigration at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and as Associate Director of Business Immigration Advocacy at the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Excuse me. Teresa also has many years of government service, both in the administration of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Thank you, Teresa, for giving us the honor of your presence at today's event, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition and the New Jersey Business and Industry Association and the other sponsors for this. Thank you to my fellow panelists who covered a lot of ground. I think in trying to kind of wrap this all up, I think what you heard today, and probably some in the questions and also in the responses, is that when we're looking to reform our immigration laws, there's a lot of interests that we're trying to balance, right? There's the interest of employers in being able to have a full workforce And when I say a full workforce, I mean to fill all of the open jobs they have. And we're talking about immigrant workers here, but for many employers, being able to hire immigrant workers means they're also able to keep employing Americans in those jobs, particularly when you're talking about seasonal employment or temporary employment. But we also have year-round jobs that aren't able to access some of these programs. So if you are, in the livestock or dairy industry that you have year-round needs, you can't use the H-2A program. And other jobs that may be lesser skilled but are not temporary in nature can't use the H-2B program. So we have gaps in our immigration system in some temporary work programs to meet the needs of all employers. There's obviously, we want to make sure that employees are treated well. So you've heard sort of the dynamic of balancing, making sure that bad actors are prosecuted, defended, and not allowed to use the program, while maintaining ease of use for those employers who are trying to do the right thing and do it well. And that's a tough balancing act, because in any regulatory program, the trade-off is usually more regulations and more paperwork to ensure people are doing the right thing, which also makes it more expensive and difficult to use the program. And that in turn leads some employers to not use the programs at all and either not hire anybody and not reduce their hours of production. Or we know some employers are willing to hire undocumented workers who don't have any of the labor protections that these legal programs offer. So balancing all those interests is a huge issue, and that's just from a policy perspective. The politics of immigration, as many people know, are significantly fraught in the United States right now. And we've been talking about, employers in New Jersey who are seeking to use the legal immigration system. And this isn't necessarily about what's happening at the southern border, but politically in Washington, what's happening at the southern border is very important for people to address, because that's a crisis of tens of thousands of people every month arriving and, being released into the country to seek asylum, which is their right, but then they don't have the ability to work and support themselves. And so that seems like an urgent issue for Congress to fix. At the same time, we have, somewhere around 11 million undocumented people, including people brought to the United States as children who may be under the DACA program. So there's lots of different interests at play when we talk about immigration reform. There's lots of different bills that we're looking at. In the past, this has all been bundled into something called comprehensive immigration reform, a big bill that would sort of try to do everything all together. And those have failed for lots of different reasons, but they have failed over the years. And so I do think it's time for Congress to think about, can we do specific things? Can we do a bill that would address the issues in agriculture and the H-2A program, and that can address the interests, as we heard Pete talk about, of the specific interests of the New Jersey farmers that are maybe different than the interests of California farmers or Florida farmers or Georgia farmers or Washington farmers, right? Can we find bills that can address all of those? Can we do a bill that would address the H-2B system in a way that would maybe permanently allow some of these exemptions that have been piecemeal allowed, or expand the cap beyond its current 66,000, so we're not relying essentially on a lottery system to pick winners and losers amongst the employers that are applying. And can we do this and separately from these other issues which are important and big in Congress? And I think it's incumbent upon everyone who has an interest in seeing these programs work and work well to not only impress upon their members of Congress the need to do something, but impress upon the members of Congress the need to do something rather than nothing, right? The other thing I think that it's worth saying is that most of these programs have not seen any change in 30 years or more. That's a long time to go without addressing our immigration system. Most other countries that receive immigrants, work visas or other ways, they adjust their immigration systems on an annual basis, if not more frequently. and they look at what does our economy need? What does our population growth needs to grow our economy? What are the kind of jobs that we need to fill? Do we want to sponsor people who can help with innovation and the next frontier of science and technology? They adjust their systems on a regular basis, and yet we have a system that is set in stone because Congress hasn't changed it in 30 years and doesn't seem to be able to do it. So at the end of the day, these are issues that Congress has to address. There's no one else who can do it. There's very little the administrations of any party can do to really make a significant difference in these programs over the long run. And I think that, we've seen our last election show once again that the country is very divided politically. It's close and it swings from one party back to another. That should really encourage everybody to work together across the aisle to get bipartisan support for these bills, and try to do what you can to negotiate to balance the interests as much as possible, recognizing that no bill is perfect. No bill will ever be perfect, and everybody has to give a little to get. At the end of the day, we have to get votes on the floor, and things pass or fail on their merit, but they have to try. And so I think for New Jersey, the imperative is to get members of Congress to try. I think that's true not just for New Jersey, it's true for the entire country. We need to fix our immigration system. We need to address all of these issues that are very important. But most of all, we need to get Congress to act. And so I will wrap it up there, saying thank you to you all for this. Thank you to those who are actively working on these issues, and thank you to those who are listening today.
Teresa, thank you for these very inspiring words. And what is so inspiring is that you're operating in a bipartisan manner and trying to bring groups together to reach a consensus on a path forward. That's something that's really integral to the philosophy of our coalition. So thank you to you for joining us today. Thank you to all the members of the panel. Thank you, David, for your initial remarks and your participation in this conversation. And thank you, Pat. Before we conclude today, I'd like to say a word about the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, the organization that brought you today's program. The coalition is committed to sensible, evidence-based immigration policy that strengthens our economy and that brings prosperity to all Americans. We are a relatively new group. We currently have 40 member organizations, but we're very eager to build up our ranks. If you represent an organization or a company that supports our goals, we encourage you to become a member. And by the way, there's no fee to join the coalition. You can check out our website at njbusinessimmigration.org for more information and to complete and submit if you'd like a membership form. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us at our future events. Have a great day. Bye now.